The wonder is always new, harumphed Ralph Waldo Emerson, that any sane man can be a sailor. One can't help seeing justice in Emerson's stricture when one thinks of the cockleshell captains who set out across the Atlantic through every kind of wind and weather. Before the race, the one-man crews and friends labored like Phoenician gangs to get the boats in shape. Many were as familiar in design as old sporting prints, but the favorite was an aluminum Leviathan sailed by French naval lieutenant Eric Tabarly, who, in another boat, won the last of these races in 1964. Each of these varied boats was designed especially for this solo race. Rousing interest mixed with sympathy was the little American proa, Cheers, which British observers likened to a child's plastic bathtub toy, a sobering estimate when one thought of the big and sometimes frighteningly splashy bath which it would decorate. Cheers' living quarters were as tiny and incommodious as one might expect to find inside a celluloid duck. Bagpipes have cheered on more desperate causes than any other instrument, and as the piper skirled out his wailing defy, a field of 36 vessels set out into a swirl of misty weather. The sea doesn't remember reputations, and Lieutenant Tabarly shortly came back out of the swirl with a collection of troubles. Tom Follett, captain, bosun, and crew of Cheers, emerged from a tubular nest in one of his twin hulls to take these pictures of himself and of the endless heaving hills of the ocean, which bring a special kind of exhilaration and fulfillment to some men and depressive nausea to others. Englishmen who love a sporting flutter began to take an interest in Follett's gallant water bug, and at big London bookie shops like Ladbrokes, the action rivaled that on the U.S. Democratic primary.
The transatlantic race, just a moment, sir. It's 3-1 Lizard Malcolm and 6-1 Cheers. Yes, sir, £50 to win Cheers.
The owners back in Newport were on the books for a modest 200-pound wager, but their principal concern was for the safety of their friend Tom Follett.
We understand Golden Cockerel may be checking in here next Tuesday, which is certainly far behind his estimations. And may I only add that Cheers is still out somewhere, and we expect her in before too long.
The news was as thin and flavorless as invalid gruel, consisting of unsubstantiated rumor and wildly contradictory sighting reports from ships and planes to whom a small pitching boat presented an identification problem. Suddenly, the foreground was full of a joyous sight, and the hands which had been clenched were waving in an airy dance of relief. For Follett's wife, Priscilla, bounding across the webbing which joined the twin hulls, was a trip into a sunshine all her own. Two big catches of more conventional design preceded Cheers across the line. The winner, the 57-foot Sir Thomas Lipton, and the South African entry, the 50-foot four-trekker. All three broke the record set in '64. Follett talked about what it's like to handle this odd boat.
Well, I think the most impressive time was about a 10-12-hour sail I had, not too far from Halifax, Nova Scotia, when the wind was just in the right direction and it was blowing just the right speed, and I had the boat all trimmed up, and the sun was shining, and it was really going. Unfortunately, it didn't last long enough.
Were you able to carry sufficient supply with you in those two hulls?
Oh, yes. I eat very sparingly, and I could carry supplies for 3 months without any trouble.
Did you have a lot left over when you got here?
I didn't, but only because when I was running along in very light weather, I started throwing things overboard on the trip over.
Did you get exercise? Did you come out and walk around in calm weather?
Oh, yes. In fact, I even did a little swimming when I was south of about 40 degrees of latitude where the water was warm enough.
Did you put a rope around yourself and jump over the side?
Oh, yes. Don't forget the rope. If a puff of wind comes up, that boat goes a lot faster than I can swim.
You're an old sailor. What is the kind of special feeling that sailors have at sea? What is it that makes you feel so good about it?
I don't know whether I feel good about it or not, because every time I go out, I usually wind up, especially if the weather's bad, I ask myself, what in the world am I doing out here? I should be home in front of a fire with a nice book.
But you do keep going back out. There's something that pulls you out. Could you guess what it is that pulls you out?
Wait, well, no. I think it's maybe because I lack good sense.
For Cheers' family, the venture ended as it had long ago been launched, with a round of the toasts, from which the cocky little boat got its name.
Hey, did anybody tell you this?
As spare and stripped as Cheers is, she has the grace of directness, the beauty of utility, and for Sailor Tom Follett, she has been more than a home and more than transportation. She has been a somewhat moist magic carpet. This is Haywood Hale Broon with Cheers from Newport.